I mean, they're not
It's
wrong.
like we're expecting it. We're fine. We're completely within the limits. I mean, that's what they said, which was absolutely true, because what they do is they set the limits based on what they find. Monsanto will say, oh, you got to raise the limit there because we found some samples that are over the limit. And EPA says, okay, fine, we'll raise it by a factor of 20, So they keep raising limits whenever Monsanto points out to them that you got to raise the limit. Otherwise, people are going to be,
oh my goodness, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the EPA just keeps raising the limits instead of actually saying, hey, maybe there's too much,
Whole Sticks is taking the stressful out of Ancestral by turning organ meat into a treat.
Whole Sticks turns their 100% grass-fed, regeneratively raised cows into snack sticks that include liver, heart, kidney, and tongue, making nose-to-tail nourishment easier and tastier than ever before. My kids actually thought that these meat sticks tasted like pepperoni.
No, they're actually delicious. It makes organ meats not a chore at all. I love taking these to our homeschool co-op because then I know my kids and myself are getting a great nutrient-dense food while we're out and about.
You can use code MAMA50 to get 50% off on your first order of any size bundle. Just go to www.wholesticks.com and enter the coupon code at checkout to try them for yourself.
Did you guys hear that? That's 50% off. That's a huge discount. Don't miss out on this. Again, the code is MAMA, MAMA 50 for 50% off. Go to wholesticks.com. That's wholesticks with an X.
Mamas, I can help you improve your family's health with my 5-week online course, Real Food, Real Families. It even has 5 weeks worth of meal plans. So check out nourishthelittles.com and use the code NTL10 for 10% off. Welcome to Modern Ancestral Mamas. We are Corey and Christine, two moms on a mission to bring ancestral wisdom to modern motherhood. Okay, in today's episode, we are going to be diving deep into the hidden dangers lurking in our food system. Join us today as we sit down with a very special guest who is one of the leading experts in her field to unravel the truth about glyphosate, pesticides, and their impact on our health, the soil, and future generations. We are aware that this episode might feel a little heavy with some of this disparaging information, but Corey and I are going to try our best to give MAM listeners practical applications and end with some hope. Before we begin, we just want to remind everyone that if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit the little bell, the subscribe button, and you can share this interview with your friends and your family. Please if you are a traditional podcaster, rate our show. Give us 5 stars if you feel called to. Leave us a comment. We love reading comments. And that's a free way to support our show. All right, guys, time to get started. So please welcome Stephanie Seneff to Modern Ancestral Mamas.
Thank you.
All right, so we usually start our show with kind of a round table question. Everybody can take a chance to answer it. And it's just kind of like to break the ice, get things moving. So today's question is, what is one simple change that the listener could do to reduce pesticide exposure?
The obvious answer to me for that is go organic. Whenever you shop at the grocery store, look for the certified organic label. Or find a local farmer who says, I don't use chemicals, and trust your farmer. Buy from the farmer. I think it's really those two choices. It's extremely important. I think going organic can really help to reduce, not completely eliminate, but reduce your exposure, particularly to glyphosate, which is the one I really care about.
Yeah. I would say, I'll answer next. I'm going to piggyback off of that and say, talk to your local farmers. Meet them. Talk to them, go to farmers markets, ask them how they're raising their food, their animals, their produce, because in a lot of instances, these farmers might not have the money to pay for an organic certification, but they are using beyond organic practices. So get to know your local farmer.
I don't have an answer to this question. I'm going to default to you too. I do want to say though that we live in the country now, so we don't really have neighbors to worry about what they're spraying on their weeds. However, I remember like a while ago, Christine, when you and I were first friends on Instagram, and I posted something on my stories about like spraying the weeds in my patio. Okay. And the first story was supposed to be to get people to be like, oh my God, what are you doing? So I just had like a video of spraying some weeds, and you sent me a message. You were like, are you kidding me? And I was like, hold on, just click through. Because if you have weeds that you're trying to deal with, this is just a practical tip, okay? Buy the like incredibly strong vinegar. Don't obviously buy Roundup. Buy this vinegar that's like 30% or something. You can get it at the hardware store. You can buy it on Amazon or something. And that works awesome on weeds and is not going to poison your land. Actually, though, question, Stephanie, about Roundup for weeds and stuff. Like if you live in a neighborhood, we used to live in a neighborhood and my neighbor would always spray their driveway with Roundup. And it was my neighbor who our kids played together. And I was always concerned about like, how long do I need to wait before I let my kids go over there? Because, my kids are running around in their backyard without shoes on and whatever. What's the practical, how would you deal with that? Aside from, one thing you could do would be to talk to your neighbor, but that's not necessarily always an option for everybody. So, like me, if I were to, if I were to keep my kids home, what would be the minimum amount of time that I should not allow them to go play over there?
Yeah, that's a good question, and the answer is not clear. Monsanto claims that glyphosate gets broken down quite quickly, and after maybe a couple of weeks is what they're thinking it'll be gone.
That's still a long time, though, for kids.
It is a long time. And we think about 2 weeks away from those kids because it was sprayed. But actually, in some soils, it lasts for a very long time, even years. And, there were studies done in South America, I think Brazil, where they looked at the amount of glyphosate in the soil year by year, where GMO Roundup ready crops were being grown, that they're designed to be resistant, so you can spray glyphosate on the crop. Every year there was more glyphosate in the soil, so it was not disappearing from the year before. It was accumulating. Very sobering. And another study on trees up in northern Canada, the trees had been sprayed with glyphosate like over a decade before, and they still found glyphosate in the tissues of the, like in the took out sections of the tree and found glyphosate in it. It had taken up that glyphosate from a whole decade before and still had it. So it can last an extremely long time.
So it's not breaking down like Monsanto is claiming it is.
It will break down under certain ideal circumstances, but those ideal circumstances are often not met.
Interesting.
And in fact, it's interesting too with phosphate. They're discovering now with phosphate fertilizers, you can activate the glyphosate that's hiding in the soil because the glyphosate binds to things that phosphate binds to. And so when you add phosphate, glyphosate gets taken off and phosphate goes on in its place. The glyphosate becomes toxic and the plants all die. That actually happened to someone who wanted to give extra phosphate fertilizer to increase the yield of his crop. And he killed the crop because the glyphosate became activated because of the phosphate.
Interesting.
Wow.
And so how is Monsanto, what sort of studies are they putting out there to quote unquote prove that glyphosate is breaking down?
I don't think so. I think they're not. They're just basically claiming it.
They're just claiming it. Oh,
yeah.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Oof. Okay. Before we go much farther, can you give us kind of like a brief backstory on how you got to where you are? Because you didn't start out, trying to study this stuff, right?
No, my career made a very big change in 2007. I really did a complete rewrite of what I was working on, because before that, I spent most of my career developing. I'm a computer scientist and I work at MIT. I've been at MIT all my adult life, undergraduate, graduate, PhD, and then as an employee and now senior research scientist, which is the highest level on the research staff. And my work was around developing tools, training computers to be able to communicate with humans using natural language. So what we called spoken dialogue systems. And that's really a precursor to things like Amazon Echo and Siri.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, we were the really pioneers. I think we probably built the very first so-called spoken dialogue system where you could talk to the computer and get, for example, directions. We did a Voyager system, we called it, which was directions finding. And we did we had a
That's
weather
so
domain
cool.
on the phone. You could call up the weather domain, ask for the weather. And so we had applications like that. We did a flight booking application, things like that. And
Wow.
restaurant guide, we did a number of different applications. It was quite fun. And also I worked on teaching second language, developing computer games to allow people to learn a second language, and particularly English and Chinese. So an English-speaking person would talk to the computer and play a game, actually like a card game. And the cards would have pictures on them, and you could learn numbers and different pictures of different things like dogs and cats or appliances, and you'd have to name the card in order to play it. So you're learning the vocabulary of the cards as you play a card game, kind of thing, and practicing with the computer. And then you could even set it up so two people could play against each other remotely. You practice on the computer until you get good at it. And then you could be playing with someone who speaks Chinese, and you have to speak Chinese and they have to speak English. Each of you is trying to learn the other language. It's really pretty amazing. So
That's really
I
cool.
love that work. And then I actually quit that. That's what I was doing right before I got interested in autism, 2007. I got really worried because every year more autism. We're just diagnosing it more. Don't worry. I was worried. I was worried sick, actually. I thought we got to figure this out because something in the environment is causing this. I have the tools to do some, correlation studies. Let me see what I can find, type of thing. And fortunately, the company that was funding me was willing to just switch over to this, to stop what I was doing before and switch over to this, which was awesome. And they've been funding me up to this day. That was in 2007, so almost 20 years. They've been supporting me, which is really great. It's a Taiwan computer company, Quanta Computers, actually. So I was very lucky that I could do that, and I started looking, and I actually became frustrated. I looked for 5 years, and looking at a lot of different things, and various exposures, and coming up short, realizing that there was a gut problem with autism. I understood that because I was reading a lot about autism symptoms and whatnot. So I was looking for something in the food, and or the water or something, something they were ingesting. And I happened to be at a conference where Professor Don Huber gave a 2-hour presentation on glyphosate. I walked in the room not knowing what glyphosate was. This was in 2012. And I walked out of the room convinced that I had found my answer. It was that quick. I was like, wow, this is it. And it just has all the right stuff because it's pervasive in the environment. It's all over the food supply, especially the processed foods, which the kids eat a lot of, cookies and crackers, And so they're being chronically exposed, and the mom's being exposed while they're in utero. And then and he talked about the effects of glyphosate in that talk, which lined up very well with what I understood was going on with autism. So I just went back and started reading everything I could on glyphosate and published my first paper probably within 6 months or something. And now I've published several papers on glyphosate and on autism and glyphosate. The most recent one is quite complicated and goes into all these different reasons why, It's very clear to me. It's not the only thing that causes autism, but I think it's the primary cause of the epidemic.
Right. Because when I hear you say that you believe glyphosate is the smoking gun that causes autism, my first thought is, well, what about vaccines?
No, I know. I agree. They play a role for sure. And in fact, vaccines have glyphosate in them.
Right.
So it could be the glyphosate in the vaccines, especially MMR, which has the highest level of glyphosate among all the vaccines by far, according to the tests that were done by Zen Honeycutt and Anthony Samsel. Independently, these two people did tests and found glyphosate consistently. They both tested the same set of vaccines, but different samples, and they got a consistent story. Both of them found the highest levels by far in MMR compared to the other vaccines.
Why is there glyphosate in vaccines?
Because they use the live virus. In fact, it was the live virus vaccines consistently that had the glyphosate. The vaccines that had aluminum in them did not have glyphosate. So you get an either or. Aluminum is also another thing I looked at, and I think aluminum in vaccines is a problem. but they're independent. The ones that have aluminum don't have glyphosate. The reason is because they feed them foods that are contaminated. Okay. The nutrients that they feed to the, for example, eggs, right? So they grow them on eggs, chicken eggs, and they have glyphosate in them. Or they grow them on gelatin from collagen, glyphosate. These things all have glyphosate in them. And so the vaccine picks up the glyphosate.
What is the connection? What is it that you really latched onto with glyphosate and autism?
I think it was the gut problems. The glyphosate disrupts the gut microbiome. That is central. It kills off, especially the beneficial microbes that are crucial for the infant gut are very susceptible, very sensitive to glyphosate. And bifidobacteria, lactobacillus. Lactobacillus is the one that helps you digest milk. So a lot of people have dairy intolerances, and kids that have to be put on soy formula because they can't tolerate milk. I think that's because the lactobacillus are not in sufficient numbers to be able to help the host to digest the casein, because casein is a protein that has a lot of proline in it, and proline is difficult to break down. The microbes actually supply enzymes to the host that help to break down the casein, and also gluten. So both gluten and casein have that property, a lot of proline. The proline can't get broken apart from the other amino acids in the protein. And then you get these peptides, these short peptides that are allergenic. And then you get antibodies developed to those peptides. And then you get autoimmune diseases of various sorts.
Very interesting. Okay. Can we back up just a little bit? Could you give us a short history on glyphosate? What is it? Where did it come from? And bring us to where we are today in terms of glyphosate.
Right. So it was originally discovered they were using it, they patented it as a pipe cleaner, actually, because it can strip metals off of pipes. It's a very strong metal chelator. And that's part of its problem in health as well, because it binds to the minerals that are crucial. There's all these minerals that we need in very small amounts, these micronutrients they're called, like cobalt and manganese, magnesium, copper, zinc, all of those. They all bind very strongly to glyphosate. And then so glyphosate it's like a magnet. They stick to the glyphosate, and then the microbes, for example, lactobacillus, they critically depend upon manganese. They have an unusual property that way. The glyphosate keeps the manganese away from them so they can't get at it. And then they become deficient in manganese, and they become sick, for example. So it chelates those minerals. And anyway, so then I think that someone accidentally discovered that it kills plants. I think it was an accidental discovery. And then they said, oh my gosh, maybe we can use this as a weed killer, So this is sort of like a light bulb went off. And then they patented it as a weed killer. And then the rest is history. So it wasn't until the late 1990s that glyphosate really got going. Before that, it wasn't used that much because there were all these other herbicides that also worked. But then they figured out how to engineer the crops to be resistant. That was a real breakthrough in the technology to insert a microbial gene. They discovered a bacterium that had a version of that enzyme that wasn't affected by glyphosate. The enzyme is called EPSP synthase. And so they understand that it really hurts that enzyme. And that enzyme is absolutely crucial for the plants. It's also absolutely crucial for the microbes. So our cells don't have that enzyme. They don't have the entire pathway that enzyme is in. It's a really important pathway in the microbes. And the microbes use that pathway to make essential nutrients for the host. So it's not like it's not important to us. It's just that it's not our cells that are being affected by that problem. But the microbes are crucial to supply the nutrients, which don't get supplied because the microbes are sick because of the glyphosate. That makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so anyway, they put this gene into the plants, the crops, and they've done this for several crops, corn, soy, sugar beets, canola, and alfalfa. I think those are the key crops that they use this on. And most of the crops in the United States of those categories are GMO Roundup Ready crops. You can spray glyphosate all over the crop; it doesn't die. So very convenient for controlling weeds. And that's when it started skyrocketing. I mean, after that, you could see the rate of usage of glyphosate was going up exponentially, exactly in step with the rise in autism. Exactly in step.
It isn't exactly in step. So as it goes along the timeline, they're both just following each other.
Yeah, well, so it's an exponential growth, and so if you integrate over that, it's still an exponential. So they're being exposed in the past, and it's integrating, and it all works to be exactly lining up. Both of those curves line up.
How do you, I mean, forgive me if I'm sounding dumb, but in the scientific community, don't they say correlation does not equal causation?
Oh, they scream it at you. They scream it at you. And they also say, how can one chemical be responsible for so many diseases? Because it turns out we have a huge list of diseases that are going up exactly in step with glyphosate. This was what I spent my time doing. I collaborated with Nancy Swanson. We had a good time rummaging through all this data, looking for trends and finding disease. Oh, here's one. Oh, sleep disorder. Oh my, this looks perfect. We got a big list. It was amazing how many different diseases, and many of them are related to the cognition in the elderly as well as the young. You've got the ADHD and the autism, sleep disorder, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease. It's pretty amazing. ALS. These are all going up dramatically. And in step with the dramatic rise in glyphosate. So they say, well, it can't be possible that one chemical could cause so many things. But I say it can be, because I think glyphosate has a really unique diabolical mechanism of toxicity that can explain all of those diseases.
And these are all, I mean, you mentioned some of these are neurological diseases, but we know that there's the gut-brain connection.
Absolutely.
So really, it all stems in the gut.
It absolutely does.
Wow. No, I know that this is insane. And we know this. This is something Corey and I know. I mean, we've known this for years. And yet when you hear it from, literally the top research scientists on glyphosate, it's still just it hits you like a ton of bricks.
I know.
Like this is serious stuff. How is it that people are still spraying this?
Yeah, well, the thing
basis?
is, Monsanto claims that they prove that it's practically non-toxic to humans. They claim they proved that, and they didn't, because when you look at their own studies, you can see that they cheated, basically. And the EPA was so happy to have a way to control the weeds and make farming cheap. There's a lot of pressure. Let's just do this. This is so fantastic. What's not to like about this? This thing is awesome. And the thing is, glyphosate's a slow kill. So they could rig the studies to not look long enough. In fact, they did that with the rats. They had a rat study, and they had a rule: if you don't see any evidence of harm after 3 months, you're good to go, right? With an animal study. And
3 months?
Yeah, they said, look, expose them for 3 months, and if there's no obvious problems, great. It's a great chemical.
Oh my God.
And so Seralini in France led a group, and they did the same study. They repeated Monsanto's study pretty much verbatim, except they kept going after 3 months. And by the time these rats had died, they had all kinds of problems. The females had massive mammary tumors. There was kidney damage and liver damage, and there were reproductive issues, and she had shortened lifespan. They had all of that when they gave them a low dose of glyphosate for their entire life. And that paper got retracted because the industry was so determined to get rid of the bad evidence, and then it got republished at another journal, so it still holds as a published peer-reviewed paper. But that really was an eye-opener.
What are some other ways that they were cheating, their studies?
Yeah, there was a study that I'd like to bring up, which wasn't cheating, but they didn't reveal it to the public. And it's a very interesting study from my standpoint, because it supports my argument for exactly how glyphosate is so toxic and causes so many different problems. And it has to, and I write about that in my book, by the way. I have my book, Toxic Legacy, how the weed killer glyphosate is destroying our health and the environment. That was published in 2021. It was selected by Kirkus Reviews as one of the top 100 nonfiction books of that year. So I was really happy about that. And I would encourage people to read my book. I tried to make it as low scientific as possible, to try to make it accessible to the general public. I'm not sure I completely succeeded in that, but there's a chapter in my book where I give the arguments for why I believe what's happening is happening. And it's still something that's very controversial. The industry denies that it's possible. So I'm saying this thing happens with glyphosate, and it's a unique property of glyphosate that nothing else has that I know of. And they say it's not possible. So that's where we're sort of in a bind there, you could say. But it makes a whole lot of sense to me, and it makes sense from the standpoint of the actual studies that Monsanto did. They commissioned people to do a study in the 1980s. And that study was amazing because they took bluegill sunfish. They had these bluegill sunfish. They exposed them to radio-labeled glyphosate so they could track the radio label. And then they were interested in the question of, does glyphosate accumulate in the tissues? A very important question, because they argue that it just passes through, very quickly, pees out through the urine. It's all gone. It's wonderful that way, only lasts a couple of weeks. Not true, because they found radio label in the tissues. When they looked, they found it in different tissue samples from these bluegill sunfish. And then they said, well, let's just detect, see how much glyphosate is in those same tissues. So they did the standard test for glyphosate, not knowing about the radio label, just looking for it. Is that radio label still glyphosate, or is it something else, right? And they only had 20%. So 80% of the radio label went missing in terms of glyphosate, something else. Then they said, oh, well, what happens if we break down the proteins into individual amino acids? Maybe that will increase our yield. And why they got that idea, I don't know, but that's the same idea I would have gotten, because I'm looking to see if glyphosate incorporated into the amino acids in mistake of glycine. So glyphosate is a glycine molecule. Glycine is an amino acid. It's one of the coding amino acids. It goes into the proteins. Everywhere glycine goes, glyphosate could go instead, because it matches the code. And that's the really diabolical thing that glyphosate does. It gets into the proteins by mistake in place of glycine. And so when they did that, they added the enzymes to break it down. They got 80% yield. So they got a whole much more of the glyphosate was detected in those samples once they broke down the proteins. And they said perhaps it was incorporated into the protein. That's their words. And then, of course, this was buried. They didn't publish it. Anthony Samsel got it from the government through a FOIA request. And they made him sign something that said he wouldn't show it to anybody. He had to keep it to himself, but he could write about it. So we wrote about it in one of the papers we published.
Oh my gosh.
So your understanding, to break it down, tell me if I'm doing this correct, is glyphosate has the same code as glycine. And so it basically displaces glycine and inserts itself in that chain of amino acid.
Exactly. It puts itself into the protein where glycine should go.
Right. And so now talk about what happens when glycine is deficient and glyphosate is in its place.
Yeah, well, especially if you don't get enough glycine in your diet, you're going to have a bigger problem with glyphosate. In fact, one of the things that practitioners are finding is that they can give glycine supplements, for example, to autistic kids, to help them keep the glyphosate out of the proteins, just by virtue of having more glycine around, outcompeting the glyphosate, and therefore decreasing the likelihood that glyphosate gets into the proteins. So glycine supplementation, I recommend organic bone broth, because bone broth has a lot of glycine. But you can look up and find out which foods have a lot of glycine and try to eat those foods, type of thing, to make sure you have enough glycine. That can help to counteract the likelihood of glyphosate getting into the proteins. But it becomes a really fun game to look at all the proteins. I have a specific glyphosate susceptibility motif that I define in my book, and it matches EPSB synthase. That enzyme that gets disrupted gets suppressed by glyphosate, the famous enzyme in the plants. That enzyme has a glycine residue at a place where it binds phosphate in PEP. And if you replace that glycine with alanine, which is a different code, the enzyme is completely insensitive to glyphosate at any level. So that almost proves what I'm saying, I think, because it's a substitution of the glycine that's causing the problem. Once there's alanine, it doesn't substitute because it doesn't match the code. So that's how they get the GMO crops, is by replacing glycine with alanine in that enzyme.
Oh, and when you say insensitive, can you what do you mean by insensitive?
Well, so the whenever an organism has the version that has the alanine in it, and I think it was E. coli they showed exposing them to glyphosate. If they have a different version of that protein that has the alanine in it instead of the glycine, then they're insensitive to glyphosate at any level. It doesn't hurt them anymore because that enzyme keeps working.
Okay.
That enzyme keeps working because it doesn't substitute. It won't substitute for the wrong code in the protein.
Got it. Okay. Oh, wow. What do you know about sulfur pathways and glyphosate?
Oh gosh, that's a big topic. I know a lot. But yes, I identified, in fact, it was Rosemary Waring, who was working in the 1990s. She published papers. She worked on a lot of autistic kids, and she was looking at metabolites in the urine. And she zeroed in on sulfate as a problem with the autistic kids. She was finding extremely high levels of sulfite and thiosulfate in their urine. These are other derivatives of sulfur that are not sulfate, but they're close to sulfate. And so she suspected they were having some kind of problem with sulfation pathways. That she even narrowed down her ideas to specific enzymes that are involved in sulfation that she suspected would be deficient, not working properly in these autistic kids.
Real quick. So when you say problems, do you mean not detoxifying them properly?
Well, so the thing is, like,
eliminating.
Many people are sensitive to sulfites, like wines that contain sulfite.
Right.
There's a lot of people who have sensitivities to that. Sulfite is very reactive. There's an enzyme, sulfite oxidase, that converts it to sulfate. There's also an enzyme, sulfite reductase, that converts it to hydrogen sulfide gas, or even converts it to methionine, which is awesome, because methionine is a universal methyl donor, and it has a sulfur in it that can come from sulfite if you have the enzymes that can do that. And a study on E. coli enumerated all the different enzymes that were suppressed by glyphosate. And sulfite oxidase and sulfite reductase, the one that makes the methionine, these were all suppressed by glyphosate in these enzymes, in these E. coli. So the sulfite is toxic. The sulfate's not made. Sulfate is absolutely essential for transporting a lot of critical biological molecules. And so, like melatonin, for example, gets sulfated before it's shipped around. Cholesterol sulfate, vitamin D sulfate, tryptophan, serotonin, dopamine, all of these, even the sex hormones, they're all sulfated in transit. And when you can't add that sulfate, you've got a huge problem, because those things need to be solubilized, and you stick a sulfate on them, they become able to be transported in the blood. Whereas if you don't have a sulfate, they have to be packaged up inside some lipid particle to get shipped around, and it's much, much harder. So they can't get distributed because they can't be sulfated. And that's what she identified, this enzyme that adds the sulfate to those molecules. She predicted that would be disrupted in autism. Recently, there was a paper that showed, in fact, that's the case, both in the gut, in the blood, and in the brain. Enzymes that add the sulfate are suppressed in autism. So I was thrilled to see that paper, because it confirmed her work from way back. She didn't actually, validate it. She just suspected it based on the evidence she saw. But these people proved it. The autistic kids had a problem with these enzymes that add sulfate to things.
And so for kids like that, do they need to go on a low sulfur diet, or let's say they are not being exposed to glyphosate. As much as possible. I feel like it's everywhere now. But they're eating, 100% organic diet and consuming a lot of bone broth and things like that. Why would they still have trouble with the sulfur pathways?
Yeah, no, so maybe most of them have the trouble because of the glyphosate. That's what I suspect. But there is also the possibility of an actual defect in the enzyme, because you can have genetic mutations. So some people have a severe problem that they have a genetic mutation in that enzyme that makes it so it doesn't work,
Okay.
And then those people really have a hard time. It's hard to know what to do. I would recommend Epsom salt baths, because you can get sulfate. Epsom salts are magnesium sulfate, and you can get both magnesium and sulfate, both of which are good, soaked through the skin into your circulation, bypassing the gut. So I would really recommend Epsom salt baths for someone who has sulfur sensitivity. And if you avoid sulfur in your food, you're going to have a sulfur deficiency problem, which is really bad. So you're kind of caught when you can't get past the gut. But if you can soak in Epsom salt baths, or even just a foot bath, Epsom salt foot bath. And
sulfur, foods high in sulfur, the list is very long. You're cutting out a ton of foods.
Yeah.
and some very nutrient dense foods. I mean, we're talking eggs and
Some of the best foods. I know. I really
dairy
encourage people to eat a high sulfur diet. And I remember when I first started doing that, I would get email from people who would say, you know what, I can't eat sulfur. What am I supposed to do? You're telling me to eat a high sulfur diet, And then I was like, oh, I didn't realize it, because in the early days, I didn't realize that so many people would have this problem that they couldn't handle sulfur. And it's the glyphosate that's doing that. And the enzymes that manage sulfur, there's several of them that have a very strong glyphosate susceptibility motif. It's really quite amazing. Binding phosphate at a place where glycine is highly conserved, sometimes 3 glycines. The EPSP synthase just has the one. But there is a pattern. There's a GXGXXG motif, 3 glycines at places that bind phosphate. And that's the critical thing, where glyphosate could substitute for any one of those 3 and mess it up. And then they show that when people have mutations in those glycines, they have a sick version of that enzyme. So I can connect all those dots. You can find a disease, a severe genetic disease that's associated with a defect in an enzyme that has a glycine substitution. And that can tell you that glycine is really, really important. And then you can see that glycine, it works at a place where it binds phosphate. Well, that's it then. That's because glyphosate has a methylphosphonate unit that is on its nitrogen atom. It can stick it into the place where the phosphate is supposed to go, because methylphosphonate and phosphate are very similar in sort of size and properties. Glyphosate has room to put its methylphosphonate at the place where the phosphate's supposed to bind, but now the substrate can't get close because glyphosate's in the way. That's how it works.
Can we shift a little bit to the Girl Scout cookies?
Sure.
And talk. I know, right? Let's talk a little bit about what the finding was in Girl Scout cookies, and
I want to ask why Girl Scout cookies? Because that's
question.
It's so interesting because Girl Scout cookies are, first of all, they are a short season, right? We're not actually eating them for the most part. I mean, we're probably not eating them at all, but Americans in general, they're only available for, those couple of months there where the Girl Scouts are pushing them real hard at the outside Walmart. So I'm so curious why Girl Scout cookies. And then let's talk about what the findings were.
So our hope was that we could get the Girl Scouts interested in actually doing something about it. We contacted them and tried to get them to get involved with this, because we wanted it to be a joint effort between us and the Girl Scouts to basically reveal the problem with our food supply. We're not singling out the Girl Scouts as being particularly bad. Oreo cookies have lots and lots of glyphosate.
Right. That's what's getting me. I'm like, we've got Toll House, we've got Nabisco.
Chips Ahoy.
Yeah.
And goldfish crackers. We're really
right.
high.
Cheerios.
Goldfish Cheerios.
Yeah. So there's a lot of foods that are high.
All the almond milk and oat milk and.
Yeah. Well, so we wanted to pick something that we thought maybe that some really good action could happen, and we all were Girl Scouts when we were young.
Yeah.
And the Girl Scouts have a mission, to teach girls to be, leaders in society and all of this. And they have these badges. So we were thinking, be perfect, a badge. Let's say you have a badge for organic cooking, and in that badge, you go buy all your organic ingredients and you make cookies. You make cookies, and then you sell those cookies. So instead of selling the Girl Scout cookies that are packaged and made by the company, you sell your own Girl Scout cookies that are organic to your neighbors, in order to gather money for your troops, for example. And then also that the Girl Scouts could at least offer, I was hoping, just one cookie. They have one that's gluten-free, How about one cookie? You could say, okay, I only eat organic. Oh, you've got an organic choice. Great. I'll take that,
Okay.
To offer one cookie organic to show to the world, look, we need to think about this. They have the opportunity to message this idea that you need to worry about glyphosate. You need to do certified organic, We expected to find glyphosate because glyphosate is all over the cookies. So we were surprised that it was in all of them. Nothing was free of glyphosate out of the cookies we tested. There were 25 samples. And they also all had toxic metals, so detectable levels. It was very hard for us to figure out whether those levels were toxic, were somehow too much, right, compared to what you might expect just from nature, because all these metals are around in nature. And we don't know. It's really hard to find out exactly how much would be expected just from natural exposure. You know what I'm saying? Glyphosate is not a natural thing. Anytime there's glyphosate, that's something synthetic that got in there because of a mistake, basically.
Okay.
But and lead is not healthy at any level, and lead was in a good number of the cookies had lead, mercury, and that's very toxic. All these metals are really toxic. Arsenic, mercury, lead. We did aluminum. Aluminum was like 100 times, was it 1,000 times more aluminum than everything else. But aluminum is expected to be at higher levels. It's not considered to be toxic. They expect you to have aluminum in your diet, and they don't worry that much about it. If you have a healthy gut, the aluminum sort of just goes straight through the gut. But the problem is glyphosate sets up a leaky barrier. Glyphosate also binds to aluminum. So it can turn an aluminum atom into a neutral molecule by binding to it. And that becomes a small neutral molecule that can get past a leaky gut. And glyphosate sets up a leaky gut. So when you have aluminum and glyphosate, you can get aluminum into the system and over to the brain. And that's, I think, probably connected to both autism and Alzheimer's. Glyphosate supplying aluminum to the brain.
Wow. So what was Girl Scouts' response to the testing?
They haven't responded. Well, they responded to testing by writing something saying, you know what, guys, all food has glyphosate. Don't worry about it. We're just like everybody else,
Oh, wow.
I mean, they're not wrong.
It's like we're expecting it. We're fine. We're completely within the limits. I mean, that's what they said, which was absolutely true, because what they do is they set the limits based on what they find. Monsanto will say, oh, you got to raise the limit there because we found some samples that are over the limit. And EPA says, okay, fine, we'll raise it by a factor of 20, So they keep raising limits whenever Monsanto points out to them that you got to raise the limit. Otherwise, people are going to be,
oh my goodness, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the EPA just keeps raising the limits instead of actually saying, hey, maybe there's too much,
That makes me think. I was going to say that makes me think of the CDC that keeps pushing the milestones back.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
I know, isn't that awful?
Now crawling is not a necessary milestone or something.
So incredible.
Yeah,
I was so shocked when I heard that. It's the new normal, right?
Yes. Oh, geez,
it's so awful.
I mean, so here's the thing, right? They're not wrong. Girl Scouts are not wrong. Like, it is normal. And
it's quote unquote normal in our society because everything is, but that's the whole point.
Yeah, because Cheerios have it.
Should have said, "Oh my God, we've got a problem with our food. Let's see what we can do about it."
Yeah,
and offer a regenerative agriculture badge or organic cooking badge. To have badges that would celebrate the fact that these kids are aware of this, are trying to fix it. They want to bring public awareness. They could have done. They may still be able to do something great. We would love to see that. That was our point. We picked them specifically because they're actually very well funded. The top makes good salaries. They've got money. So they could do something like this, and it would be such a great thing for them to be proud of being a Girl Scout, to really push the Girl Scouts as something really special, because we're in this game of trying to fix the food. To me, it seems perfect. And then to these young girls to get this education to say, oh yeah, I need to use organic sourcing of my foods when I prepare foods. I need to get everything organic. To get that message out to the kids would be fantastic. So they have a tremendous opportunity. They're not doing anything with it. They're just accusing us of sort of being, fear mongers, you could say.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we could do as consumers or as moms? My kids are not in Girl Scouts, but and I I have bought Girl Scout cookies within the past year, actually, because I have not nieces, but like my husband's cousins' kids, something like that. And we bought them and just like didn't eat them. We just bought them to be supportive. But like, how can we as people who are, want us, because the thing is we want to support the kids.
I know what you mean. Absolutely.
So what would you say, like just super practical, what could we do?
Yeah.
Should we write to Girl Scouts? Like, what should we be doing?
Yeah, actually, that would be great. If I think for some random citizen to write a letter to say, you know what, I heard about this thing and I'm really disappointed that you guys aren't jumping on it. It would be great if, you could do this and that and the other. I would be delighted. And if you can at least offer one organic choice, I will be able to actually eat the cookies that I buy. You could really write a pretty cool thing that would just send a letter to them. Because, we sent a letter, but we sent more than one, but we're not getting anything back. if they become more aware that other people care about this, it could really make a difference. So anybody in your audience, think about doing
Yeah.
that. You know, it would help. I think it would help if you got individual mothers or people who wanted to buy Girl Scout cookies and couldn't because they're eating certified organic, you know.
Yeah. Similar to you, Corey, I was accosted a month ago and I didn't know these people, but it's very, you're stuck in there with the little kids and they've got those smiling faces and the parents and they're like, please. And I said something about, well, I don't know. I don't know about the ingredients. And they were like, oh, well, read the ingredients, look at it kind of thing. And so I turned it around and, did the best I could and ended up, I bought one package and then I literally just threw it in the trash
Yeah, exactly.
and then I mentioned it to my mom and my mom said, the next time that happens, say, I'll give you money, but I don't want the
Yes.
cookies because I can't eat them. And tell them why you can't
much
eat the
better.
cookies.
I like that a lot.
And I was
I'll
like,
pay
oh,
for the
why didn't I
cookies, but
think
you
of
keep
that?
them because I'm not going to eat them. I'm just going to throw them away. So I'll just pay.
Yeah.
That makes a lot more sense because this is one of those things where it's like, back when J.K. Rowling was getting all that heat. I don't know if you knew about this, but people were like burning her books and stuff. And she was like, I don't care. You've already paid for them. Like you paid for them and now you're burning them. It's no skin off my nose, right? I've already got my money. Thank you. It's the same thing with the Girl Scout cookies, right?
Yeah.
Like I bought some, you bought some, we paid for them. That means not, we have sent zero message. And you talking to the individual Girl Scouts or their parents also sent zero message. So what's interesting too about Girl Scouts is that the Girl Scout troop themselves gets like almost none of that money.
I was going to say, because when you pay for the cookies without buying them, they can keep all that money because
that's what I was going to say. That's brilliant.
They get much more money that way.
Yeah.
So I think
I'd much rather give them like, here's $30. It's entirely for your troop.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Keep your poisonous cookies.
So really, it sounds like what we need is obviously parents to write letters, and we need to find a company out there that is willing to stand up and be the leader in this movement. And I think, I mean, not to sound all doom and gloom, but many of them operate on, such large funds that they probably don't want to. They don't want to lose the financial gain that they get from the products that they make.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, of course, the government can make a huge difference, and maybe it will, because I know RFK Jr. is talking a lot about supporting the small farmer and getting people back on the small farms, because that's what we need. These massive farms that are using all these toxic chemicals are making us sick. It's very clear. And so if we can just go back to the kind of agriculture we used to have 50 years ago, maybe more than that. I think maybe even 50 years ago, it was already a lot better than it is now, and we just need to get back to that. And so to encourage that and to not keep on subsidizing the big farms, what they do now is they guarantee, the big farms that they won't fail, because if they have a complete disaster because of some weather problem, they get compensation. It's like an insurance, package that they get from the government so that they are willing to take that risk. And if they no longer had that, they might really think twice about even having the farm, And the other thing I feel, I'm really upset about the cows, because cows are a very, very healthy source of food. But of course, the dairy products are all really healthy, especially, of course, organic dairy, cows eating grass, cows on the grass produce really healthy dairy products. And they also, of course, have meat. So, and so there's a lot of push against cows right now. They're saying that they're releasing all this methane gas and it's causing global climate change. Glyphosate is increasing the amount of methane gas that the cows are releasing. I'm quite sure of that, because glyphosate disrupts the enzymes that convert that methane back into organic matter. And that's actually a crucial step that takes place to produce butyrate, which is it's the food of the gods as far as the colonocytes are concerned. So they're in the colon, and both in humans and in cows, those cells love butyrate, and butyrate comes from methane, from the carbon dioxide and hydrogen gas make butyrate, make acetate, which becomes butyrate, or they make methane, and the methane is because the acetate's not being made, and the butyrate's not being made. So there's like these pathways that get blocked by glyphosate, because it disrupts a class of enzymes called dehydrogenases. And so what happens is the methane builds up because these other pathways are being blocked. And the methane then gets released and then causes, increases the risk of climate change. So that if you put the cows on the grass, they do much better with their digestion. They have a lot less methane gas to release, but also they make the grass much healthier. They provide it with manure, which is a great fertilizer. They eat the grass, which stimulates it to grow. And when it grows, it grabs carbon out of the air and puts it into the soil. So if you get rid of the cornfields, replace them with grass, put the cows on the grass, and don't feed corn to the cows, you've got a system that's extremely good, much, much better than what we have now.
I'm curious because there's kind of two camps on social media where you've got the one camp that says glyphosate is horrendous and we have to be very conscious of it and eat all organic and that kind of thing. And then there's the other side that says that we can't demonize everything and it's not possible because it's everywhere already. So what's the big deal? And I'm thinking, these people are also even saying that our exposure is such a tiny amount, parts per billion or whatever, that what is the big deal?
Right. I mean,
so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, my thoughts are really just this very simple thing: is glyphosate toxic? And that's the big question. And so the EPA claims it's not. They say it's an awesome herbicide because it kills all the plants, every plant except for the ones that have been engineered to resist it. And it doesn't affect human cells at all. This is what they claim, which is not true. And so as long as they believe that it's not toxic, they don't see why there's a big deal with it. So it's really a question of whether it's toxic or not. And when I say there's all this evidence and all these different charts that show all these diseases going up dramatically, if it's not glyphosate, what is it? Obesity is another one, by the way. Diabetes, obesity, all these gut problems, inflammatory bowel disease, all these things are going up dramatically. Celiac disease, it's amazing, the list. And also some cancers like pancreatic cancer and thyroid cancer. And of course, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is getting all these lawsuits. So there's tremendous evidence just in the statistics of all these diseases going up. You have to say, if it's not glyphosate, what is it? And so that's kind of a simple answer to say it's glyphosate. And I don't know if you got rid of the glyphosate, what would happen to those diseases, but my guess is they would all get a lot better. Like, I think it is a major, major problem. And it's just a question of whether you believe it's toxic or not. That's what it comes down to. If you think it's not toxic, you say, well, the EPA thinks it's fine. It's all over the food supply, but we don't care because it's not toxic. That's a comfortable thought, but it's not true.
So what is the counter argument to why those diseases have all gone up if it's not glyphosate?
That's what I'd like to know. Do you have any ideas? I mean, there's a lot of other stuff out there, and there's atrazine, there's a lot of other herbicides. Actually, the herbicides are all really toxic, and they know the other ones are. 2,4-D, dicamba, atrazine, glyphosate, those are all regulated herbicides. Glyphosate stands out as being, this one's fine. And actually, there was a study, they used glyphosate as the standard. They said, well, glyphosate's safe, so let's use that as the standard, then we'll compare everything else to glyphosate. And they found out glyphosate was the worst one of the bunch. I think this was, again, Seralini. Seralini did a lot of interesting work on glyphosate. And he's the one who really figured out, hey, guys, this stuff is toxic. And because the regulators approved of it so many years ago, and they're not willing to go back and look, whenever they try to reassess, they ignore all these studies that are coming out. There's a whole bunch of studies coming out lately, and triggered by that study that was published by Seralini with a long lifespan exposure in 2012. Ever since then, we've had more and more independent researchers taking a look and finding severe problems with glyphosate, including, for example, there was a study on girl babies born to pregnant women. They measured glyphosate in the urine of the mother while she was pregnant. And then they measured this metric called the anogenital distance on the girls. And they found out that it was correlated. It was longer in association with more glyphosate. And that indicator, it indicates excess testosterone exposure in utero. And so they suspected these kids had excess testosterone, which makes sense because glyphosate disrupts the enzyme that converts testosterone to estrogen. very clear. And so
God.
when you have this feature, it's a predictor of polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS. And that's an epidemic right now. We have an epidemic in infertility, and the major cause of infertility, the biggest cause, is PCOS.
And out of curiosity, my understanding is that distance between what did you call it again?
Anogenital distance. You can
yeah,
kind
the
of imagine what it
anogenital
might
distance
be.
is also what is feminizing our men.
Okay, yeah, interesting. I know the men and the women are both getting messed up in terms of their hormones, and they're not developing properly, in their sexuality, I think, because of glyphosate and probably other things as well. Atrazine can turn male frogs into fully functional female frogs.
Oh my gosh.
They have Y in their females.
Oh, geez. Can you tell us what atrazine is real quick?
It's like glyphosate. It's another herbicide. It's probably
Okay.
the second most popular herbicide next to glyphosate. But glyphosate is
Okay.
by far the most used because it's considered to be so safe. But atrazine
Okay.
is used quite a bit as well. And it causes those frogs to become females, even though they have an XY gene.
Oh my gosh. What about I'm just thinking your typical yard guy that doesn't know any better and that is spraying these chemicals. What can we say to them?
You know that Dwayne Lee Johnson, do you know the story about Dwayne Lee Johnson? This was the first lawsuit on non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in California.
Against Monsanto, right?
Yeah, he was a groundskeeper for schoolyards.
Okay.
Yeah.
He only used glyphosate, didn't use anything else because glyphosate's safe. And he developed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in his 40s. He had young children, and he had a lawsuit that he won. It was a really milestone because it was the first time. Monsanto boasted they had never lost a lawsuit, and they have some very powerful lawyers to keep trouble away. But he won that lawsuit, and after that, it's just been a firestorm. All these people waiting in the wings to get their day in court. And there was just a recent one now in Georgia, $2 billion. I just heard about this one, awarded by a jury to someone with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in Georgia. And so I should mention all these states, the industry is setting up. I don't know if you've heard about this. They've been harassing all the state legislatures to try to get them to pass bills into law that would basically give glyphosate a get out of jail free card. It would say, if you have non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and you think glyphosate caused it, forget it. You can't sue. And that's because glyphosate is so essential for our agriculture that we can't live without it. So we need to poison everybody all the time because otherwise we'll starve. This is the argument that they're using. And Georgia is getting very close to passing that law from what I've heard. There's over 20 states that are trying, and mostly they're not making it through. My friend Zen Honeycutt of Moms Across America has been telling everybody, harass them, tell them you don't want this, and try to stop this process. But they're really, really determined to get to the point where glyphosate can't be sued. You cannot be sued for anything. You cannot sue for any kind of injury you think glyphosate caused, period.
This makes me think of the 1986 Vaccine Act.
Exactly so. It's exactly the same model.
Okay. So they will be free of liability.
But they won't even have a vaccine court. They won't have a glyphosate court. So you have no recourse. At least with vaccines, you can go to this government. This one is going to be too bad for you.
It makes you want to scream.
It's incredible what's happening. We've got this incredible time right now with RFK Jr. at the helm of HHS. I'm very excited about that, and I'm hoping we'll have some big change. And we desperately, desperately need it. So it's great timing. I feel so much energized by that. I was really doom and gloom. It's just like, okay, it's over. Just forget it. Humans are toast. I was really feeling that way. But I have new hope now because he's making big changes. We'll see how it all settles down. It's really disruptive right now. Big storm, basically, and we don't know how it's going to settle out. But I know he's got a very good awareness of the problems we face and a determination to make us healthy, and that's got to be good. So I think he's going to make some great changes. It'll take time, and he'll be frustrated by opposition and things like that. So it's going to be difficult for him to get done what he wants to get done, but I know what he wants to get done is good.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of hope in that.
Okay, I want to ask about the environmental working group their list of Dirty Dozen, Clean 15. I want to ask about, I just want to know what you think of that. And I want to know what you think of the claim that, or what you would say to the claim that organic is a scam.
I know. Well, that's ridiculous. Well, I want to say, when I last looked, and it was a while ago, at the Clean 15, corn was one of the Clean 15. Corn.
Yeah, I know. That surprised me. Like sweet corn is right now on the Clean 15 list.
They are ignoring glyphosate altogether, I think. They're looking at pesticides, insecticides and fungicides on the crops, the plants. And those are of concern for sure. So you don't want that. You really want to eat organic, not just for the glyphosate. There's all these other chemicals that they use in agriculture, and they're not looking at glyphosate because glyphosate's safe, basically.
Oh, whoa. Did not think about that. Yikes. Okay. I know that makes it so much more challenging, especially when you think of food cost right now and how much it's risen. And
it's insane.
What does the single mom do that can't afford organic?
I know. It's a huge problem. If you got a piece of backyard, grow your own food, right? Put something in the garden and eat that as a starter. Get a fruit tree. I mean, there's really things like that. I think we almost need to go back to sort of victory gardens. If people can just grow their own food and do it organically, they can get...
Yeah, but that's so difficult for the majority of people.
I know.
I mean, A, because as a society, we've gotten so far away from it.
Yeah.
But B, so many people live in cities, in apartments, especially, if you're lower income and you live in an apartment and you're a single parent and you have multiple children and you probably have two jobs, or
it's really to add our gardening to your list of things to do.
I can't imagine having to add gardening to that list. Back when we were doing victory gardens, it was women were either staying home or they, like my grandmother and I were just talking about when she was a kid in World War II, and she said that she and her sister were just shipped off to her grandparents' house in the country. She just lived with their grandparents for, an extended period of time because her mother was working full time and her dad was serving in the military. And so like her grandparents obviously were growing things, but her mom lived in the city and her mom worked. And, I just can't imagine. I have a hard enough time trying to keep my plants alive, and I'm at home all the time.
I have to admit, I don't do well either. I got a few herbs and I killed them off because I didn't water them enough.
Yeah.
So it's hard. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have any?
Well, I do want to say which foods you got to really worry about, because one that's surprising is the legumes, hummus, chickpeas, garbanzo beans, lentils. People don't realize that Canada did a big study, tested over 8,000 food samples for glyphosate. They did it under harassment from Tony Mitra, who's a friend of mine. He's a Canadian citizen, but he was born in India. And he just kept on harassing them until they finally did it. And they gave him all the data, and he published a book called Poison Foods of North America. It's a dry book with all this data, has all this, all these numbers. And you can see that these garbanzo beans and chickpeas and lentils were the highest levels of glyphosate were found in those products, because they're sprayed right before harvest, just like wheat and oats, barley, wheat, and some nuts, seed oils, sprayed right before harvest as a desiccant. So they're not GMO, but the glyphosate's coming up right close and personal to the harvest time, which means it's getting into the seed, and so you get the highest levels of glyphosate in these crops that are non-GMO. So you got to be really careful about that. Just hummus, I will not eat hummus unless I know it's organic, and I like hummus, So that's one to watch out for. And oats are also high, oatmeal and oatmeal cookies and
okay, so that's a good tip.
Yeah.
What about the idea that if you're not eating the outer part of the fruit, like an orange or an avocado, or I guess corn,
or a banana,
or a coconut, things like that, like, are those safer because you're eating the interior bit?
I would hope so, but I don't know. Actually, glyphosate goes into all the tissues of all the crops, so it's hard to, you can't wash it off, because
That was going to
especially
be
if
my next
if
question.
I'm right about it binding to the proteins, it gets into the proteins and you can't wash it off. It's part of the food, and it goes
Oh,
into the seed.
wow.
When crops get exposed right before harvest, they go to seed and they dump the glyphosate into the seed. So the seed oils become contaminated with glyphosate.
So the
So
seed oils,
definitely, I was going
yeah.
to say, definitely avoid seed oils then.
Yeah, for the
Obviously.
glyphosate, I hear a lot of chatter about how seed oils are bad for you, too much omega-6, but no one mentions the glyphosate that I can see, except for me. So I think the
Okay.
glyphosate might be the big reason why the seed oils are bad. And actually, glyphosate disrupts the enzymes that take those seed oils into useful places. There's an enzyme that converts arachidonic acid, let's see if I get this right, I think it's arachidonic acid, into an endogenous cannabinoid. It's a cannabinoid that you naturally make. That enzyme gets blocked by glyphosate. So then the arachidonic acid goes down a different path, which is inflammatory.
Oh,
Very
wow.
interesting. Maybe this is why people are depressed all the time.
I think so. I think glyphosate is definitely causing depression. That's another one that's going up dramatically in step with glyphosate usage.
Yeah.
ADHD, autism, depression, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all of those. ALS.
Right. Okay, wait. Let's go back to washing it off. So it gets into the protein. So, for example, ozone water. Ozone water
Yeah,
wouldn't even
it would break
do.
it down. It would be good. It would break it down. Ozone and also, of course,
Wait, to
chlorine.
drink it or to wash the fruit in it? Christine, you're talking about washing the
I'm
food in it.
talking about
Well, you
washing the
won't get it.
food in
Yeah,
those.
you can wash the food and it won't help because it'll just get out on the surface. It can't get into the fruit. But there's so, for example, with the water supply in the municipal water supply, they use chlorine to kill the bugs, and chlorine breaks down glyphosate. So I think it's, thank God they use chlorine to kill the bugs, because it's also clearing the glyphosate. I suspect. Otherwise, you would have a lot more glyphosate in your drinking water.
Interesting. Wait, but then, so could you drink ozone water and could that help?
Well, that's where it gets a little tricky, because it is an oxidizing agent, and oxidizing can be dangerous. I
Right.
actually do think this is something that you're almost afraid to say publicly. Chlorine dioxide. Have you heard about chlorine dioxide?
Yeah, there was a presenter at the Wise Traditions conference the last one. What year was that? 2024. And she was talking about, and I was like, really wanted to listen to it. But it was at the end of the day and I was just, zoning out. Like I couldn't focus on what she was saying.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating. What
Yeah,
I picked up
tell us a
on,
little
I
bit
was
about it.
fascinated.
Yeah. So chlorine. So they use chlorine to kill the bugs in the drinking water. They also, in Europe especially, they use chlorine dioxide, which is a milder form. Chlorine itself is really toxic. You don't want to take chlorine for sure. But chlorine dioxide is a modified. It's like, so sodium chloride is salt, right? That's got chlorine in it. So chlorine comes in different shapes and sizes, depending upon what it's with, as to whether it's toxic or not. It can be extremely toxic. Pure chlorine is extremely toxic. But chlorine dioxide.
And that's like what you're putting in a pool, right?
Exactly, yeah. And chlorine dioxide is an oxidizing agent, which means it can cause oxidative damage. But it also, you need the oxidation. It actually it allows the immune cells to produce hypochlorite, which they normally produce when they're fighting off bacteria, pathogens. So it can help the gut microbes to clear off the pathogens in your gut, which are there because of the glyphosate, right? But it can also break down the glyphosate. Chlorine dioxide can break down glyphosate. So I'm suspecting, so I have a friend named Carrie Rivera who's been very passionate about chlorine dioxide. She's in Germany. She has treated thousands, maybe thousands of autistic kids at least, around the world. And chlorine dioxide is a major component of her therapy. And she has reversed autism in over 500 cases. And all of those 500 took chlorine dioxide. Many of her patients refuse the chlorine dioxide because it's so controversial, especially in this country. There's so much pushback against it that they are afraid to do that. And their autism doesn't get reversed. So for her, it was 100% of the reversals, total reversal, were included chlorine dioxide as part of the treatment. She has other things that she gives, and they're all really good. I really like her. She's got she has an autistic child, and she spent over $1 million trying to fix him, and learned about chlorine dioxide through that process of try this, try that, and she finally, she hasn't reversed his autism, but he's gotten a lot better than he was originally.
And is it a pill that you take, or what?
It's a little tricky to take. I've actually taken it, and it's a little tricky because you have to get these two jars of two different things, and you mix. It's a little bit of chemistry, and that's what gets a little difficult, really. I find that's a major block, a major, what do you call them? Just it makes it more difficult to think about doing it because you're not sure you're going to get the right amount. And I would say take it in very low doses, and then she says take it several times a day for the autistic kids in small.
Yeah,
in
you're
very
supposed
small,
to drink it throughout the day.
Yeah, you can. I think you can make like a batch of it and then just drink that water, and it just has a little bit of chlorine taste. You don't want it to be too toxic, so you have to be careful with small amounts. So and it sounds really scary, and that's why it's hard to promote, But I've heard some great things as far as the consequences, and I think it's both. It also, and I looked at the chemistry of it. It causes, it oxidizes sulfur. It particularly is good at oxidizing sulfur as opposed to other things, and it actually converts taurine into a metabolite called taurine chloramine. Taurine chloramine is produced from hypochlorite. And taurine chloramine is more reactive than taurine. And I maintain that you can then extract sulfate from the taurine. The microbes can do that once it's taurine chloramine. So it helps to get taurine converted to sulfate. So she recommends taking taurine along with the hypochlorite to help with that whole process. And the taurine is actually, this whole thing of converting taurine to taurine chloramine is a mechanism the body uses to diffuse reactive chlorine. So in other words, the chlorine dioxide reacts with the taurine instead of reacting with something else. And it's a safe reaction that produces a product that's beneficial. There's a lot of things in biology like that where there's sort of antioxidants that are able to sop up the reactive oxygen and keep it safe, and then those things aren't working properly. And so therefore it goes another path. There's always pathways getting blocked by various chemicals, causing things to go down other paths that are harmful. There's a lot of that going on in biology. And it's really because the toxic exposures are messing up the pathway that should have gone down. So chlorine dioxide can be very effective if there's plenty of taurine, and if that enzyme that converts the taurine is working, all these factors, you can keep it from being dangerous and instead use it to make sulfate. And sulfate's what you critically need. So that also could be part of why it's good for the autistic kids, because they have a huge problem with sulfate.
Mm-hmm. And okay, so going back to, we're not sure whether glyphosate is getting into foods with skin on them, like we mentioned, the avocado or the banana or the orange. So we're not totally sure about those.
We're pretty sure it does because it goes into all the tissues.
Oh, you're right. Never mind. You said that. Yeah. Okay. We can't wash it off. So really, the best solution is just organic.
I think
and
so. Certified organic. And if budget is an issue, definitely organic on legumes if you are consuming legumes regularly. Right.
And grains.
And grains, right.
Right. That's right.
Grains.
Those two, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so what other things can somebody do if they are, maybe they live in the middle of corn growing country or something, and
the Midwest.
They live in the Midwest, or they live, or they know that their kids are eating more glyphosate than they want. They have teenagers, and the teenagers are going out, and eating like teenagers do.
Or the school is serving conventional snacks.
You heard about Zen Honeycutt's results on the school?
Yeah, we actually had Zen on, was it last year?
Yeah.
It was the middle of last year, I think. And we had a whole conversation about the school lunches with her. But what can we do on a practical level aside from just buying organic, to maybe help our kids sort of detox through these things. Or like they went to a birthday party and had the cake and the chips and the whatever.
Yeah.
What can we do to help our kids or help our families?
One thing would be to try to get them to eat more fermented foods.
Okay.
And in fact, I have claimed that apple cider vinegar might contain a bug that can actually metabolize glyphosate. There's very few microbes that can metabolize glyphosate. It's a tricky part of why it's so dangerous is because it has this CP bond, carbon phosphorus bond, that's very hard to break. Most organisms don't know how to break that bond. So there's just a few, but one of them is certain species of Acetobacter. And Acetobacter are found in apple cider vinegar, for example, or sauerkraut. So if you can get your kids to tolerate, fermented foods, because there's sort of it's a special taste that kids might not go along with. But I try to eat apple cider vinegar. I basically have a salad every day, and I put apple cider vinegar on it, organic apple cider vinegar. And so there's some hope that those Acetobacter could be breaking it down.
That's a great tip.
Yeah, that's cool.
It hasn't been proven. It's just a theory. But I hope it's true.
Yeah, I mean, that's easy enough for anybody. Sometimes my kids will drink apple cider vinegar straight. They really like it.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to go pickles or sauerkraut route.
Yeah.
Or they will eat a salad, but there's no way they're going to just shoot it.
Yeah.
We're not sipping on vinegar. Zen mentioned the supplement. It used to be called Magic Dirt Water. It is now called Ion Biome.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know about
Oh,
this?
Zach Bush.
Yeah, Zach Bush's. Yeah.
I think that's probably good. Yeah, I've tried that. It used to be called Restore as well. Restore.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's had various names.
It's gone through a bunch of different.
Yeah, I guess he's
Iteration
trying to find
changes.
the right name. That's fulvic matter and humic matter from the soil. Very complicated organic molecules that are in the soil, and they are binders, and they're well known for being able to bind to stuff. And so the hope is they would bind to the glyphosate, and then it would get eliminated through the feces. They may even harbor enzymes that can break down glyphosate, because there's apparently, and I wrote about this in my book because I found an article about this, that there are certain enzymes that are produced by the microbes that specialize in sort of generic processing of lots of different things. They're sort of really good at breaking things down. And so the hope would be that those enzymes could break down glyphosate, and they get stuck in that organic matter. The enzymes are hiding in there. And so when you eat the organic matter, you're also eating the enzyme, and the enzyme could then break down the glyphosate. That's also theoretical, but that would be really nice if that's true. I'm looking for enzymes that break down glyphosate, or microbes that have enzymes that break down glyphosate, because that's the trick, I think. It's kind of sad in the waterways, because cyanobacteria are a microbe that can break down glyphosate. It can fully break it down, releasing the nitrogen atom and the phosphorus atom, which are really great for fertilizer, right? So the glyphosate's a good fertilizer if you can break it down. But what happens is that the cyanobacteria in the waterways break down the glyphosate and make the nitrogen and the phosphorus available to the plants. And then you get massive overgrowth of the algae. And then that causes, it sucks up all the oxygen. You get this hypoxic zone and this dead zone, and then also you can get a release of nitrous oxide, which is a really horrible greenhouse gas that can get released because of this hypoxic situation that's created by the overgrowth of the vegetation because of the release of the phosphorus and the nitrogen from the glyphosate molecules. So that's an interesting consequence that is removing the glyphosate, which is great, but also messing up the ecosystem. And you get the red tide out of that as well. You get some of these toxic, products that are really can kill you out of the whole process of all this overgrowth of these things that are fed by the glyphosate that's broken down by the cyanobacteria. Does that make sense?
I just see it as like a cyclical.
Yeah, it's really tough. And also the nitrogen washes off more easily from the crops because the nitrogen fixing bacteria get disrupted by glyphosate. So the crops can't get at the nitrogen that's there You have the nitrogen fertilizer, you add it to the crop can't take it up as efficiently as it should. Then the rain comes, the nitrogen gets washed off into the waterways, and now you've got this nitrous oxide, which is going to cause greenhouse, gas effects. It's always, it's just such a cascade. It's amazing. There's another one that I only found recently, which I was quite fascinated by, because it's these microbes that produce a gas, and I'm not going to remember hydrogen. Let's see. I think I've forgotten what it is. It's a sulfur-containing gas, carbon disulfide. I think it's that's released by these microbes in the shallow seas. So, for example, if you have the Mississippi River going into the Gulf, and there's these microbes that can make this gas that has this sulfur in it, and that gas actually seeds clouds, so it increases the rain over the oceans because of the clouds that get seeded by that gas. And those microbes are very sensitive to glyphosate. So when you have the glyphosate coming down the river, killing off these microbes in the shallow seas, now you can't make clouds. Now you've got no rain. Now you heat up the oceans, and then you've got another big, mess.
Wow. Yeah.
The whole ecosystem is really fragile, and glyphosate's just a train wreck for everything, I think.
Oh man. But it feels almost impossible. We are literally fighting giants when it comes to
they have
getting
a lot of power.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's sad to me that we're willing to just be poisoned, the whole country can be poisoned chronically.
I think it comes back to the fact that we have agency, right? So we are all in charge of our own families, and we get to make these choices as mothers, as consumers, shoppers, people who are eating. We get to make these choices to what we buy, what we put in our own bodies, what we bring into our homes. And until, big changes are made, either at the government level, at those companies, it doesn't really do anything to affect us, right? Like, we still get to make those choices, and we still have to make whatever is best for our family, the choice that we have to make whatever choice is best for our family. That's where I have to settle, because otherwise I can get really bogged down in the ugliness of it, and all of these things that I really have no control over.
That's what's frustrating.
I don't know if you guys have that.
You sort of think the government is going to take care of us, and they're going to make sure that we're not, getting sick because of what we're eating. And you want to have faith. The government has regulatory agencies in place. They're making sure our food is safe. We can confidently buy it at the grocery store. It'll be fine. And it's just not true. And once you recognize that, it's very sobering. And then to think my neighbor's going to spray glyphosate on his lawn, I can't stop him, or if I'm living near a cornfield, I can't stop it. It's like so frustrating. You have to breathe the air that's got the glyphosate in it. You have to breathe. You can't just not breathe. And so it's just really frustrating. It would be one thing to just make sure that you keep your own family safe, but you can't do that when you're in an environment where everybody else is spilling all this stuff out into the environment. You have to fix it at the systemic level. You can't just fix it for your own family. That's the thing. You can do your best, and you can certainly do a lot, I think, by being careful, but it isn't good enough unless you can get the whole government to wake up and to realize we need to change the whole system. It really needs to happen at the government level. I had hoped that we could just do it grassroots, bottom up, and I do think that can go pretty far. If we refuse to buy the food, then they won't make it, right? Everybody go organic. If we could get all the people to be convinced to buy organic, they'd stop making the poison food because it's not being sold. That can work. But the government can do it so much more efficiently if they're willing. They're just not willing.
I do think we've at least gotten as far as we have to where we have RFK
I think it's awesome. It's such a big change. I really couldn't have imagined this a year ago. It was
I feel the same way about that.
It's really kind of
so
a miracle.
I do think that our grassroots have kind of gotten us to this point.
I know, and I think we can feel that way. Certainly the people brought to his attention the problems they were facing, and he listened long before he became have control in the government. So it's just awesome that he's there, and I just hope he can handle the heat, because he's going to get a lot of pushback, and he has to figure out how to navigate a wire.
Yeah. So there is a popular influence in the MAHA movement who recently posted about Bayer removing glyphosate from Roundup,
Oh, yes.
but replacing it with chemicals that are 45 times more toxic to human health. Have you heard of this? Is this true?
I think it's probably true, because all the other herbicides are considered to be a lot more toxic than glyphosate. That's why glyphosate is unregulated. The other ones, you have to have sort of license permission. You have to be, registering that you're buying this product. Glyphosate is so safe that they don't need to do that. But this is just messaging. Glyphosate is actually, as I said, this study that these people did, where they had glyphosate as their standard safe version, and then they studied these other herbicides compared to glyphosate. Glyphosate turned out to be the worst one in that study. So although you think those things are much worse, they're actually not. Many of them are acutely toxic, and you can tell right away you can get sick, but glyphosate, as I said, is a slow kill. Its mechanism of toxicity is really subtle, this business of substituting for glycine. There are actually other chemicals that substitute for other amino acids, but I don't know of anything else that substitutes for glycine. And glycine has such an important role in so many proteins that it's really getting messed up by the glyphosate. And that's what's causing all these different bizarre problems that we're seeing, which are, it's subtle and hard to track. You don't see an acute toxicity response. You just see a bunch of enzymes that aren't working right. It's not easy to spot that,
I think that's something that's really interesting, because a conversation I've had with multiple people about how a lot of people in the real food space or the MAHA movement or whatever will use the word poison or toxic, and for foods that are not going to produce a response. I mean, it's not like drinking bleach, right? Like if you drink bleach, you'll either die or you'll be in the hospital.
Right.
Immediately.
Exactly. Very acute and very sudden.
Right.
Exactly. Yes. And glyphosate's not
but
like
we
that.
use these terms like poison and toxic for things that take 20 years to kill you.
Exactly.
And
That's
it gets
thing
confusing to people who are not within our little bubble of real food people, or organic or whatever you want to label us as. I think it gets confusing and almost worse than confusing. I'm not sure what the right term is, but it puts
them off.
It puts them off, but it also like dilutes what we're saying.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Because these words toxic and poison,
if you use it and you don't see it, right? You don't see
reaction,
it. You say,
right?
I ate this food that had lots of glyphosate. I didn't feel anything. I'm fine. Right. That's the thing. Yeah. It's subtle. It's like arsenic. You can get poisoned by arsenic very slowly. Just keep taking arsenic, and it'll eventually cause horrible problems like kidney failure. But you're not aware that you're being poisoned because it's slow. I think those kinds of poisons are really, really dangerous. And glyphosate is like that for sure. It's because of this subtle mechanism that it has, which doesn't bowl you over. You don't get nauseous or something. You don't have diarrhea. You just, you actually can get constipation from glyphosate, but that's because it's poisoning proteins. There's a protein that has a lot of glycines at critical places that contracts the gut, so that protein can become disabled because of glyphosate substituting for glycine. And then you get constipation. I think that's something that's going on.
Oh boy. And constipation is like a huge problem for America's toddlers and really young.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Oh, yes. No, now it's normal to only go to the bathroom every, 4 or 5 days or something like that.
For toddlers.
Yeah. They're moving. Similar to what the CDC is doing.
They just changed the rules, right? Oh my goodness, that's interesting. Yeah, it was because there was a woman who tried to kill herself by drinking glyphosate, and our glyphosate-based formulation. She almost succeeded, but it paralyzed her gut. It was a huge amount.
Awful! How awful!
Paralyzed her gut. And so to me, well, yeah, of course, because this enzyme. There was a study on this enzyme. They just had one glycine, and if they changed it to alanine, that enzyme could only contract at like 2% capacity. That protein could only contract at 2% capacity. Wow. The protein that actually contracts to push the...
Yeah.
So you're just poisoning it, and then you only get some of them get affected, but not all of the molecules. So that some of them are still working, and the other ones kind of get in the way. The ones that aren't working get in the way, and make everything work badly.
Christine, do you have anything else you want to touch on? I feel like we've touched on most of what we wanted to cover.
I know. I was looking to see if we had maybe touched all of the basic stuff.
Stephanie, is there anything else that you feel like you really need to impart or share?
I guess I always like to mention sunlight.
Oh, yeah, please.
Get out in the sun without sunscreen, without sunglasses. I hate it when I see a little 2-year-old wearing sunglasses. The sun is very nourishing, and especially behind the eyes is the pineal gland. It needs light to work properly, and the pineal gland is critical for sleep. Melatonin. It makes melatonin sulfate, but it makes the sulfate. It gets catalyzed to make the sulfate with sunlight. So you really need to have sunlight exposure to the eyes and the skin. Very healing and many, many benefits. Of course, vitamin D is just one, but there's a lot of other benefits as well. I'm a big fan of sunlight.
I've never been a sunglass person. Like, I've never liked them. And I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, oh, but you need to put sunglasses on. The sun is so bright. Like, it's bad for you.
I know. And I'm a good example because I never wore sunglasses my whole life. And I love being outside in the sun. I had glasses and I started taking them off. Like when I go outside, I need to take just regular glasses, corrective glasses. I don't wear them anymore, So my eyes are really, really good. I just saw my doctor and he said, I don't even have cataracts. And I'm past the age when most people my age have already had cataract surgery. My eyes are fine.
Wow.
So there you are. They sell all these sunglasses to try to protect your eyes from the sun. I'm an anecdotal evidence of the opposite.
Yeah, I like that.
I'm guilty of wearing sunglasses, but it's only when I drive or when I'm watching my kids in the pool because I can't see them very well when they're in the pool, and it freaks me out a little bit.
Well, unfortunately, glyphosate gets into the eyes and causes damage, which can actually then make the sun toxic to the eyes. So that's another problem.
It's not that it hurts my eyes. It's just that I cannot, if my kids are in the pool and they're the sun is reflecting off the pool, I just can't see them as well. And I'm just super paranoid about the pool.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. I think that's a perfectly good reason. And it can be if the sun is so bright that you're sort of squinting and you really, you probably need some protection. It just like everything else, it's an oxidizing agent, but it's actually doing something good with that oxidation. That's what people don't realize. They keep wanting to have antioxidant, but you need oxidation in order to keep things healthy in the metabolism, in metabolic processes. It's just that it goes the wrong way when certain enzymes get blocked. Certain critical enzymes that will keep you healthy get blocked by glyphosate, and then you have to go a different path and cause trouble.
Okay. Wow.
Okay. I think we've covered all the things that we wanted to talk about.
I agree.
Let's give everybody your
information,
where to find your book. Yeah. What any websites or
Toxic Legacy. It's available on Amazon and several other booksellers. Chelsea Green is the publisher. You can probably buy it directly from the publisher. And then I have a website, stephanieseneff.net, and that's about it. Lots of, if you just can remember Seneff, Seneff, you can find lots of interviews and presentations. Good. There's a lot of material.
I was about to say, you have definitely been at the Wise Traditions Conference several times.
That's right. Yes, I really enjoyed Wise. I went every year for many years, and then I got over here in Hawaii. It's too hard to get there. So
yeah, I don't blame you.
You're in Hawaii now?
Full time.
Oh, that's wonderful. Wow. Yeah. But not to go off on a rabbit trail, but isn't there a lot of GMO food in Hawaii?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of battles going on. It's really ground central. There's sort of Kauai in particular. They've had, all the islands have had battles between the organic farmers and the chemical industry, because chemical industry has a big presence on the west side of Kauai. And then the North Shore is all these organic farmers, and they each side hates the other side's guts. They're always fighting. Yeah. But there was a bill 2491 several years back, actually, back when I had first learned about glyphosate. I got actively involved in fighting that bill. And it was supporting that bill. It was a bill to require that they say what they're spraying, when they're spraying it, where they're spraying it in advance, so you can protect yourself. If you happen to live near that field, you can get out of your home and go someplace else. That was the bill that got passed into law, despite tremendous opposition from the industry. And then, of course, it got diffused because the Hawaii government, this is a Hawaii county law, and the Hawaii state government basically said, "Oh, you can't do that. This county can't control the poisons that are being sprayed on the county. It has to be done at the state level." And so it basically wasn't really effective. This happened in several different counties of Hawaii, where they passed these bills into law against tremendous opposition from the industry. And all of those laws became ineffective because the state government basically kept them from being able to do what they were supposed to do. And this is a pattern. You put the power at the very top, give a lot of power to the top, even beyond the countries, to these sort of multi-country organizations, like the Trans-Pacific and the Transatlantic, treaties. And then the country itself, even the European Union, a country in Europe decides they want to ban glyphosate. The European Union just says, no, you can't do that, Really frustrating. You take away the power from the little guys, and then you just completely control the top by dumping lots of money into the system. That's the strategy.
I've heard that Mexico is trying to ban glyphosate.
Very much so. They've been trying so hard to do that, and we've been fighting them like crazy. The U.S. has just tried everything we can to keep them from banning glyphosate, because we're afraid that we're going to not be able to sell our corn to Mexico. And I hope that's what happens, because that would be so great. It would inspire the farmers to start growing proper corn, because corn's a delicious food. I love corn, but I won't eat it unless I know it's organic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so would Mexico be the first country to ban glyphosate?
No, I think Bermuda. I don't know if Bermuda ever allowed glyphosate. And Sri Lanka banned it for a while. I think they've got it back now. It goes on the black market, and then the farmers say, no, we can't handle this. And I think it was Venezuela. They had problems with their farmers dying of kidney failure at a young age. I think it's due to glyphosate on the sugarcane farms. And they banned it for a while. I think that it doesn't stick, And of course, European countries have been trying to ban it. And then the European Union says, no, you can't. So it would be lovely if Europe would ban it. The entire European Union should ban it. They'll probably do it before we do, unless Kennedy can get his act together.
Yeah.
I would be so thrilled if the United States banned it, but that's not going to happen. But what could happen is that they stop making it because there's too many lawsuits. But of course, they're working hard to fix that problem.
Right. Oh, geez.
Yeah. So our takeaways from this episode are everybody write a letter to Girl Scouts.
That would be so awesome.
And also get involved at your state level and make sure your state is not passing these laws that are giving Monsanto and whoever else immunity. Yeah. And also then eat organic, buy organic, grow your own food, all those things.
And sunlight.
And get sunlight.
Sunlight, yes. Yeah.
Great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for coming on and enlightening all of our listeners on glyphosate and giving us these helpful tips.
Thank you so much for having me. It was delightful.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. That is it for us today. Thank you so much for listening. Go give Christine a follow at Nourish the Littles. Nourish the Littles. I'm over at For Nutrient's Sake, and then our show is at Modern Ancestral Mamas. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and then wherever else you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to rate, subscribe, like, blah, blah, blah. Thank you so much. And we will see you next time. Bye, y'all.